Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. My name is Bree Buonomo. Hi if you're new here, or hey if you've been here before. Today I'll be doing my October wrap up. The month of October has been a pretty fantastic one, all things considered. So in the month of October I had a fall break and my productivity levels and kind of creative well was very much refilled, so we had quite a good month overall. So without further ado, I'm going to get into the books I read, the things I wrote, and some personal tidbits about my life in the month of October. So the first book that I finished in the month of October, it was The Lost Art of Listening by Michael P. Nichols and Martha B. Strauss. This is the third edition of the book, but I actually read a little bit of the third edition, but also listened to the second edition audiobook because that was a bit easier to kind of digest when I was on the run and on the go a lot. So this book is essentially a kind of guide to being able to help yourself listen better. So while I did have to read this for a class that I'm taking currently, I do think this is a very digestible book to read for anyone, especially someone who might have a hard time listening or feel like maybe they can improve their communication skills, because listening is a huge part of communicating. So overall, I actually really enjoyed this book. Now there are the third edition updates itself to kind of include social media. So while listening to the audiobook, I probably lost some bits that would talk about the social media because the second edition doesn't have that at all. So I do think this is a book that I am going to use in my practice as a counselor, as well as just kind of for my own life. And I may end up reading it again, or kind of taking bits through it to kind of use in sessions or for families and for myself, because like I said, there is a social media component that I missed while listening to the audiobook. But overall, I do recommend this. This is kind of in the psychology self-help category of a book. It's definitely a way that uses a lot of counseling skills, or things that counselors might teach you in order to help yourself. So if you feel like you're struggling with listening, this book is pretty easy. And if you have a Scribd membership or an Audible membership, there is the second edition audiobook. It's pretty solid, but like I said, there won't be much talk of that social media component as there will be in the third edition. So overall, I enjoyed what I had to read for this, and I would recommend it for other people. The next book I read in the month of October was The Drowned Country by Emily Tesh. So this is the sequel to Silver in the Wood. It's a duology novella that I read the first one last year and ended up being one of my favorite books of the entire year. The Drowned Country takes place a few years after Silver in the Wood, so I don't really want to ruin too much because they are novellas, and if you haven't heard of or read the first one, I would direct you to my 10 best books of the year video that I made last year so that you can kind of get an update. But basically the first book follows these two characters, Silver, who is a kind of young man who's struggling to fit in society, as well as Tobias, who is kind of like a folklore of a man. He is not quite human, but not quite fully otherworldly. So the two of them are kind of misfits, and they end up on a small adventure together and getting closer. But at the end of the book, something happens that ends up picking up in the sequel. And of course, my furnace just kicked on, so it's going to be a little bit noisy for a couple seconds, but hopefully it will kick off in a minute. Sorry about that. So anyway, The Drowned Country is essentially the sequel, a direct sequel, but a couple years after the fact, and it picks up the pieces from where we left off with our friends. But it's mostly in the perspective of Silver, whereas the first book was mostly in the perspective of Tobias. Now I will say that the first book, because it was a novella, I do think it was pretty succinctly wrapped up. There was definitely parts where there could have been a spin-off or a sequel or something like that. So I wasn't mad that there was a sequel to this short little story, but I was not as invested in the story as I was the first time around. And I don't know if it was because if it was in Henry Silver's perspective instead of Tobias, because I did find Tobias a compelling and kind of gruff character to be following, whereas Henry might be more of a typical main character, as kind of he's bumbling and unsure of himself and trying to gain footing in his new role that he acquired after the end of the first book. And considering that I don't think there's any more books after this one, I felt like I might have enjoyed the first one and how that ended more than the second one, but I'm not mad about it overall. I just think I wasn't needing a sequel. So that kind of like, you know, was disappointing in a way, but I am glad that I read it. I'm glad that I was able to get back into that world, and I kind of know how the story's supposed to end now. The next book that I finished while I was in Kansas was The Witching Place: Murder by Manuscript. This is a cozy mystery by Sophie Love, and it's the Curious Bookstore Cozy Mystery. This book was actually the second in the series, and the reason I ended up reading it was because I have a couple emails that I'll say like when there's ebook deals or stuff like that, and this ebook was free for the day that I got the email, so I picked it up because I was like, well, it's free, and I wanted something fun to read. So I read it, and you could definitely tell that this is a sequel in some aspects because there is history alluded at but not recapped. So as a sequel, I appreciate that normally, where like we're not really rehashing everything that happened in the first novel. But as someone who's picking up the book, you can kind of tell that there's pieces missing. So I definitely don't recommend reading the second book in a series. However, despite that, I ended up enjoying it for what it was. I got enough of the backstory that I missed in the first book that I wasn't really feeling the need to read the first book in order to figure out what's going on, and I really liked kind of the pacing of this novel. So this whole, I guess, series focuses around a girl named Alexis who left her Boston literary agency job in order to kind of pursue her own dreams of owning a bookstore, as well as trying to figure out what happened to her father, who mysteriously vanished when she was younger and never heard from him again. So she ends up in this small town a little bit outside of Boston and is retracing his steps, as well as trying to uncover the mysteries of the town, because there's definitely something weirdly supernatural about it, but she can't place her finger on it. So in this novel, there is, of course, a mysterious murder and some like book thieves that are happening, but everyone wants this one specific book, and there seems to be no information on this book other than it looks super old and mysterious, and everyone wants it, and they want it bad enough that they will commit murder to get it. So Alexis is kind of thrust in the middle of this, and from what I gather in book one, she was also involved in some kind of murder mystery in the first book, so people of the town are very suspicious of her, especially because everywhere she goes, there seems to be death and murder following her. As I said, I think this book series is probably very fun, especially if you like cozy mysteries or want something like a palate cleanser. I honestly really like the writing. It was very campy, but I kind of get the sense that cozy mysteries are going to be that way in some sense. And this is the first time I ever read one, so I can't really say if this is like great for the genre, but it was a fun time for me. I probably wouldn't go out of my way to continue the series unless it was free or a bundle deal maybe. I also would consider maybe listening to the audiobook for them, but as of now, I'm content with reading just the one book unless something else, you know, changes my mind down the road. But I definitely think I will pick up more cozy mysteries in the future. The next book I finished in the month of October was Blood Rose Rebellion by Rosalind Eves. So this was a reread for me, and I think one of the first rereads I've had all year, if not the first. I don't know. My brain is scattered. I don't think I've reread anything this year, but I have been putting this series off for a very long time because it was one of those things where I read this as an arc. So back in like 2016, I read this book when it was an arc that I had and was given. And if you don't know what ARC is, it's advanced reader copy. So I was able to get an advanced reader copy, and I read it, and I was obsessed with the book, and I couldn't wait. But because I read it so early, I had quite a long time to wait for the second book to come out. And when it did, I bought it and then just kind of forgot it. I read this first book in 2016, and I'm like, I have to reread it if I'm going to continue with this series. So this book follows our main character, Anna Arden, who is in an elite society called the Luminates, and they are the controllers of magic in the world. So she is kind of like in a high French society with her family, and it's going to be her sister's debut. So the debut is essentially when you kind of try to show off your magic, and there's different magic systems, like different types of magic that you can have in the Luminate Society. And at your debut, you kind of show off and demonstrate what your skill is in hopes that you will kind of be taken under the wing and accepted into not only like the magical society, but also in general, like to marry up or marry wealthier. So it's very much tied to the politics system of the world, and this is a historical fantasy, so it does follow real life events to some degree. Now, the author does have a note in the book that, you know, she did take certain liberties with stuff and also kind of change timelines around. Like certain real events didn't happen at the time that this book takes place, but it does heavily involve like the Hungarian War. But basically, Anna has never really had magic, and anytime someone tries to perform a spell around her, she tends to break the spell. So no one's ever been able to figure out what this was, but they just kind of say that she's barren of magic, and thus she's kind of useless in Luminate Society, and this really upsets her. Understandably so. So when her sister is going to debut, she also finds out that her sister is trying to move in on the boy that Anna is very interested in. And out of anger, Anna kind of lashes out and destroys her sister's spell. Because of that, and because this boy has been kind of playing both sisters against each other, the family decides, you know, in order to not be disgraced, they send Anna away with her grandmother to Hungary, which is her grandmother's home country. And while there, she kind of gets involved with the Romani and a small rebellion of sorts, because they are trying to pretty much overthrow the Luminate Society. They believe that magic should belong to everyone, and they think that the Luminates are controlling the magic in order to only keep it to themselves. So she kind of gets caught up in this rebellion, and it goes from there. So this, like I said, was a reread, and I will say when I read it in 2016 and being like, you know, 5 years younger, I was much more heavily invested, I feel like, in the story the first time around. I also think I thought the side characters played a more prominent role, because I remember like loving one of the characters in this, and I'm like, he's my new book boyfriend and I'm obsessed with him. And when I started reading it this time, I'm like, he's like barely in this book, and he doesn't really even have like a love connection with the main character as I thought he did. So I don't know if it's because I read the arc, if things actually changed when I finally read the finished copy, because it has been so long, and maybe the one character was actually more involved in the arc than he was in the book. I actually don't even have the arc anymore, so I can't really compare the two. Yeah, I was a little bit let down with the reread. I still think it's very well written. I really like the historical elements and how it's woven into the story, and I feel like it's done in such a natural way that you would almost believe that there was magical societies back then. But the characters didn't really connect with how I thought they were going to connect, essentially. But overall, I would say it was a good read, but I will continue with the story. And the last book that I read in the month of October was The Schopenhauer Cure by Erwin de Jalom. So Erwin Jalom is actually credited as being the founder of group therapy, which is literally as it sounds. It's group therapy, when you go to therapy as a group, and he kind of was the one that pretty much put into practice how to run group therapy. So he is a well-known counselor, and I believe he's like a PhD doctor as well. Essentially, this book follows a couple different points of view. So the main premise is that there is a doctor who has run counseling and group therapy for many years. But at the time that we start the book, he has actually been diagnosed with a terminal illness, and he only has a few months to live, essentially. So he is coming to terms with his impending death, as well as trying to figure out, you know, like if he lived his best life and how many people he's helped along the way. So in his grief and kind of distressed state of mind, he starts to reach out to people who he didn't think he helped very much, and he ended up reconnecting with this man named Philip. So Philip in this book had a sex addiction, and the therapist was trying to help him overcome that, and felt that he failed as a therapist. Like he was unable to help Philip overcome his sex addiction. So he reaches out to kind of talk with him, just to kind of make peace of, you know, was there anything else I could have done better? And Philip and him begin to talk, and they kind of make an arrangement where Philip is now trying to be a therapist and get his degree. And he asks the therapist, his original therapist, to be his supervisor in order to get training hours. So therapist is named Julius. So Julius reluctantly agrees as long as Philip comes into his group therapy that he will obviously be ending due to his illness, but he wants kind of Philip to understand the interconnectings of how it means to relate to people, because Julius does not think Philip can relate at all to others and that he's not going to be a good therapist because of it. So that's the main plot of this book, and how they, Julius kind of overcomes his, grief and departing his group and his practice for so many years, and Philip kind of starts to understand and maybe relate to people better, because Philip feels like he's a philosopher much more than someone that connects to others. There's a couple other things that they talk about. Arthur Schopenhauer, who was the person who's kind of like credited as like the OG philosopher that influenced a lot of people in the psychology field, like Freud and Jung and a bunch of other people, and they kind of feel that he doesn't really get credited for much. So it kind of talks about his life and how he and his own philosophy flourished. And it also kind of follows a few other side characters and how like they relate to each other when you come into this group setting. So that's a mouthful. That's a very big explanation of the book, but essentially it's about group therapy at its heart and how people relate to each other. And I had to read this book for class, but I do think it's well worth reading, especially just for someone to kind of get that very character-driven story and how people relate to one another. My favorite parts of the book were when they were all actually in the group therapy and working together. My least favorite parts was when they were going into the backgrounds of specific characters. And now I mean that as in like there was a chapter dedicated to a couple characters where they just followed their journey, not in the group setting, but outside. And I wasn't as invested in that because I thought it was much better handled when they were having like a group dynamic, when people were talking back and forth. So that could be just my own personal preference, but I do think overall it really helped piece together who these people were and why they were in the group setting and why they needed to have group therapy. But overall, it was, I think, a very good book. I would definitely recommend it. I'd probably give it like a 4-star because I did find it slow in some parts, but the parts that really went well worked well for me. Otherwise, in the month of October, I started reading The Wicker King by Kay Ankrum. This is a contemporary novel and kind of like one of those angsty teen, very impactful novels I think it's going to be. And it's very fast-paced. So I thought I would finish it this month because it's not a big book, but I just actually have been so focused on writing that I haven't finished it yet, which is a good thing for me. But on that note, I will jump right into my writing. So in the month of October, I actually did quite a bit of writing. As I've already mentioned, I had fall break for school, which was a pretty solid week where I didn't have classes at all. And during that week, I made a ton of progress in my prophecy project, which is my adult fantasy novel, which I would love to be my debut novel, and I will hopefully query in the next couple months. So during the month of October, I finished that novel, and I will be having a whole month-long vlog of me completing that draft, which was draft 4. And it's the draft that I feel the most comfortable with. I think I've made the most progress, and I'm ready for some people to read it to give me feedback. So I'm very excited. I am not going to talk too much about that because I do have a whole vlog for it. So that will be coming out on Friday, November 5th, if you're interested. But I am very excited to have completed that. I feel like I kept putting it off, but I also knew that personally I was struggling with a lot of anxiety during the month, especially when I first got back into the thick of school and I was very nervous. So I knew that I really couldn't push myself, and I wasn't going to produce quality writing if I was so stressed out with other things. So I'm glad that I didn't force anything, and I'm super happy that this month worked out, that I was able to complete it. Additionally, for Preptober, I outlined 2 novels. So the first I do have a video for, and I will leave that linked above. That was me outlining my NaNoWriMo novel for my vampire book, which is a very character-driven story, and I will, like I said, direct you to that video because I do think it is better being watched that way. I also outlined my co-written project. I am going to be writing an adult rom-com with my co-writer Caitlin, and we are going on a writing retreat to try to write the whole book in a weekend. So we are also going to be vlogging that whole experience. I'm very excited, and you guys can look out for that in a week from now. Hopefully, it's gonna be in the week after this video post. I just don't know what day. Hopefully Tuesday, but we'll see. I'm very excited for all of that. And like I said, that was my creative well. I worked on those 3 things. I did 2 outlines and finished 1 draft of another project, and I'm completely content with that. And lastly, some personal tidbits. I feel like every time I get to my personal life, I have no idea what I'm talking about. Even though like I do stuff, I just feel like, what do I actually say? But in the month of October, I went to Kansas for the first time. It was also the farthest west I've gone in the continental USA. I have never been out of my time zone, which is Eastern Standard Time, because I'm on the East Coast. So I actually left the time zone for the first time, which was interesting and pretty fun. We went for a wedding, so it was my husband's nephew was getting married, and it was a good time. I ate a lot of food, and it was honestly just relaxing. They're really, like, I wanted to do stuff, but it was also kind of nice not having to rush anywhere and just kind of like hang out and just be for once. And I think that helped recharge me so that I could be more creative the week after that. I also watched Dune, and I've found that I feel like it's a pretty polarizing movie from reviews I've watched. I've read some people like hate on it. I've read some people who absolutely like adored it. And I do fall towards the latter. I thought it was a very well done movie for myself. I've never read the book. The only thing going into the movie that I've ever known about Dune is that it's a heavily political book and there's sandworms. That's all I've ever known. I've known nothing else about anything. And while I can see why some people might be unhappy with the direction the movie went, especially because I think there was enough characterization and enough details that were dropped that I was able to understand it as someone who's never read the book. I can see maybe if there wasn't enough for the people who are diehard fans of the book series. And I've also heard people who love the book series who thought this was really well done. So I get that it's like, it's just very, with any adaptation, it's like extremely polarizing, I feel. But I really loved it. The only thing I will definitely critique upon that I was kind of like rolling my eyes out of, like, seriously, this is what we're going to do again, is that I've noticed that the people of color in the movie were the ones that were pretty much the only people that were killed. And I'm like, I just feel like this is not going to sit well. If it doesn't sit well with me, it's not going to sit well for other people. And I feel like at this point in time, like, aren't we like past that? Like, it's 2021, guys. And like a well-known, like, good director, I feel like should have been like, oh, hey, maybe we should check that. But that's really my biggest critique of the movie, is that I feel like they just kind of took a step backwards with that. Because everything else, like the cinematography, for being like a sand planet and being dull and like, you know, how exciting can that be? Like the color palette, I thought the cinematography was done extremely well. I really liked how things were framed and how like specific like motions and directions clearly given to the actors like made moments either more intense or more emotional. So overall, I really liked it. If you've watched it, let me know down below what you think, because I like I said, I know it's the people have so many opinions and I would love to know what other people think. We also started watching Titans, which is on the DC universe. And we actually started watching on HBO Max because it was on there. And I'm curious to know what other people think about that show. I was a diehard Teen Titans fan, so much so that sometimes like I really had animosity towards Teen Titans Go, because it like, in some ways I felt like it destroyed what I loved and held so near and dear. But Teen Titans is one of my favorite shows to date. It's up there with Avatar. I think the like writing of the show is so well done, especially for like a kid's show. I think it's really great. So I was kind of skeptical on how the show with live action and being grittier and darker would actually be. And in some ways, I enjoyed it a lot more than I thought I would. I think it's a pretty solid show, all things considered. However, I do think it lacks a lot of characterization. I think a lot of like moments that we gained over seasons of Teen Titans in the animated show is kind of lost when you're like mashing together people really quick in like 8 or 9 episodes. I also thought so we started watching season 2, but we didn't finish season 2 in October. And I don't want to give anything, I guess spoiler alert, if you feel like you're going to watch Teen Titans, I'll try to put something on the screen. If you finished all of season 1, they were leading up to a big bad guy that was going to, I assumed, be part of season 2 for the entire season. And I was extremely let down when in episode 1 of season 2, they defeated him in 4 seconds. I was like, are you kidding me? Because again, in the Teen Titans animated show, like it was a whole season, I think, or at least a whole like half a season dedicated to this villain. And it made more sense because the villain is one of like the like biggest, baddest villains in the DC universe. So I was just very let down by that. Very let down by that. I feel like because of that, I can't label it as like a great show by any means, but I still enjoy it. I was just very disappointed. And now we're starting to like branch out in season 2 where there's multiple big bad villains, which again were like their own story arcs in the Teen Titans animated series. And I know it's not fair to compare the two, but they're going the same route as the animated show. So like, why aren't we like fleshing these out more? The only thing I could think of is potentially because I didn't know if it was going to get greenlit for any more seasons, but I'm pretty sure it did already get greenlit for a 3rd season, maybe a 4th. So I don't know, man. I don't know. So that's just my opinions on Titans on DC Universe. And yeah, I think that's all that I have for the month of October. I mean, I'm sure there's other personal tidbits I could talk about, but I don't know, man. I don't know. Oh, one of the big things that happened for my YouTube channel is I hit 800 subscribers. I hit 800 on October 30th. And it's like, guys, thank you so much. That was awesome. I am so happy. It's so weird. It's like, it's one of those things, and I know people say it all the time, but it is very humbling when you're like, wow, people want to like stick around and watch me. And it's like, there's 800 of you and I don't know why, but I'm very thankful for it. I truly am. I love that I have this like little community to support me on my writing journey. And I do hope that I will have more to share and offer as my writing career moves forward. So thank you guys. In December, I end classes, I believe, on December 12th. So sometime maybe that week or the week after, I will be hosting a live stream. I have on my community tab a poll that's currently running if you would like to go vote. I asked for some ideas on what to do as an 800 subscriber celebration, as well as my 2-year anniversary. So my 2-year anniversary on YouTube was actually in September, but I was in the thick of my grad school stuff and my anxiety was high and I just completely forgot about it. So I figured in December I will kind of combine 800 subscribers and my 2-year anniversary together and do one little celebration. So I kind of asked if there's like any live streams that you guys want to see, and or maybe like a specific video, like a tag video as a celebration, because I did a tag video for my 1-year anniversary, I believe. So yeah, those were some ideas. So definitely go check out my community tab and vote if you have not done so already. And hopefully I will be able to party with you guys in December. And on that note, I think I'm going to stop rambling. I know I've talked a lot because I had a lot of books that I had to talk about today. So on that note, I'm going to go celebrate all the victories I had in the month of October. And until the next one, I'll see you then. Bye.